Today, as the clock ticks toward the execution of Jeffrey Todd West in Alabama using nitrogen gas, another condemned man, Blaine Milam, faces lethal injection in Texas for the brutal beating death of a 13-month-old girl. Two lives ending on the same day, raising questions about justice and redemption in America's death penalty system. Jeffrey Todd West spent 26 years on death row, his fate sealed after he shot and killed a convenience store clerk point blank during a desperate robbery gone wrong. A chilling act that left a family shattered and a community in fear. But to grasp how he ended up there, we must rewind to the quieter days of his youth, before the drugs and crimes took hold. Hit that like button and subscribe to be part of our growing community. Also, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from as we dive into this chilling story. Born on July 29, 1975 in Alabama, Jeffrey Todd West grew up in a family that included his parents, a stepfather, and a brother. Details of his home life remain sparse, but what stands out is a strong religious foundation that seemed to anchor him early on. He attended Southside Baptist Church in Southside, Alabama, regularly, even joining a church chorus that performed at services across the region, and once traveled as far as Canada to sing. This involvement, happening just a couple of years before his crime, painted a picture of a young man connected to his community and faith, perhaps finding purpose in those group trips and performances. His education took him through high school, where at least one teacher saw promise in him. His economics instructor was so impressed by Jeffrey's honesty and standout qualities that he wrote a commendation letter to his parents, highlighting a side of him that was reliable and principled. No records point to major troubles in his childhood. No fights at school or signs of deep poverty, abuse, or neglect that might explain a troubled path. Instead, West appeared to be an ordinary teen, raised in a setting that emphasized church and family values, without the kind of extreme hardships that scar some lives from the start. But cracks began to show as he entered young adulthood, hinting at a shift that would spiral quickly. By September 1996, at age 21, he was convicted of unlawful possession of marijuana and drug paraphernalia, his first brush with the law, marking the start of substance abuse that included narcotic pills, LSD, and crystal methamphetamine. He entered rehab twice, but the grip of addiction tightened. Just months later, in March 1997, came a burglary conviction, a petty crime that escalated his downward trajectory. Friends and family later reflected that this wasn't the Jeffrey they knew. A former girlfriend even ended their relationship after he drank a beer, calling it completely out of character since he'd never touched alcohol or drugs before, to her knowledge. These early missteps, fueled by sudden drug use and poor choices, built a fragile young man who veered from church choruses to criminal acts, leaving us to wonder, what hidden pressures or unseen turning points pushed him from promise to peril? Was it the lure of quick escapes, or something deeper brewing beneath the surface? As Jeffrey Todd West's life unraveled in his early 20s, a key figure emerged, his girlfriend, Amy Pearce. The two were in a romantic relationship, sharing a bond that turned toxic amid West's spiraling drug addiction to substances like methamphetamine, LSD, and pills. Pearce, who was 19 at the time, became entangled in his desperate world, where money was scarce and bad decisions mounted. What led them to the crime? West's prior convictions for drug possession and burglary had left him broke and hooked, pushing him to eye quick cash. Having once worked at Harold's Chevron gas station in Attalla, Alabama, he knew the layout intimately, including where the money was hidden in a simple cookie can. In whispered conversations, West confided to friends his plan to rob the place, chillingly adding he'd leave no witnesses to avoid getting caught. Pearce, loyal but caught in the chaos, joined him that fateful night, driving the car as West's addiction-fueled desperation boiled over into a deadly scheme. Was it love that blinded her, or the same dark pull of survival? Their partnership would soon shatter lives, leaving us to ponder how everyday struggles can twist into irreversible horror. On March 27, 1997, around 11 p.m., West and Pearce set out in her car, cruising toward Harold's Chevron at 2920 Nakalula Parkway in Attalla, Alabama. a modest gas station where locals grabbed snacks and fuel without a second thought. West, armed with a .45 caliber handgun tucked away, had scoped it out from his old job there, knowing the night shift clerk would be alone and the cash easy to grab. As the clock ticked past midnight into the early morning of March 28th, West entered the brightly lit store while Pearce waited outside in the vehicle, engine idling. Inside, 43-year-old Margaret Parrish Berry, a dedicated mother and clerk just doing her job to support her family, stood behind the counter. West pulled his gun, pointing it directly at her, forcing her to hand over about $250 from the hidden cookie can. But he didn't stop there. In a cold, calculated act, he made Berry lie face down on the floor behind the counter, then shot her once in the back of the head at close range. The bullet caused instant devastation, leading to rapid death. No chance for her to fight or flee. The scene was grim. Blood pooling on the tile floor, the register untouched but the cookie can emptied, and Berry's lifeless body hidden from immediate view. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. It was an execution-style killing to eliminate a witness, turning a simple store into a tomb. The emotional toll? Berry's family was left heartbroken. A son who would later speak of forgiveness amid grief. A community gripped by fear that anyone could be next. Her death ripped apart the fabric of everyday safety, forcing us to question, how does one person's desperation erase another's entire world, leaving echoes of tragedy that linger for decades? After the gunshot echoed through the empty store, West fled back to Pearce's waiting car, the stolen $250 in hand, and they sped off into the night, trying to act as if nothing had happened. But cracks appeared fast. West confided details to a few associates, and rumors swirled. What sealed his fate? Overwhelming evidence piled up quickly. Witnesses recalled West's earlier boasts about robbing the Chevron and killing anyone there to leave no witnesses, directly linking his words to the crime. Pearce, arrested soon after, flipped on him, pleading guilty to robbery and murder charges in exchange for a 35-year sentence, then testifying against West about his plan and actions that night. Incriminating letters West wrote to her from jail were uncovered, some with erased parts that experts restored, revealing confessions like details of the shooting. Physical clues matched too. The .45 caliber bullet from Berry's autopsy, the exact amount stolen from the known hiding spot, and no signs of struggle suggesting a premeditated kill. The case cracked open within 24 hours, thanks to a store employee, Donna Mitchell, who tipped off investigators about a suspicious local named Scott Huey, whose connections quickly led straight to West. Police swooped in, arresting him on March 28, 1997, just as the sun rose on the horror he'd unleashed. But as the cuffs clicked, one can't help but wonder, in that moment of capture, did West glimpse the weight of his choices, or was it already too late for regret? As the noose of evidence tightened around Jeffrey Todd West, he faced a courtroom battle that would decide his fate. His initial defense? No clear-cut alibi placing him elsewhere during the murder. Instead, his lawyer spun a tale of misdirection, pointing fingers at another local man, Joseph Scott Huey, as the real culprit. They claimed the investigation zeroed in on Huey early, suggesting he suspiciously paged a key investigator, Todd Entrican, before his name even surfaced, hinting at guilt or inside knowledge. It was a desperate bid to sow doubt. Why rush to contact police if not hiding something? But was this smoke and mirrors, or a genuine crack in the case that could set West free? That defense crumbled under the weight of cold facts and timelines. Prosecutors dismantled it piece by piece, starting with testimony from gas station employee Donna Mitchell, who swore she was the first to tip off investigators about Huey, based on his shady ties to West and others, long before any page from Huey. Entrican took the stand to clarify. Huey's page came only after detectives were already heading to his house, around 10:45 to 11 a.m., on March 28, 1997, proving the defense's story was a fabrication. This not only exposed the ploy as a fairy tale, as the state called it, but highlighted how West's own web of associates led right back to him, forcing us to ask, when does casting blame become a confession of your own shadows? The trial, unfolding in May and June 1999 in Etowah County, was a gripping showdown packed with twists that kept everyone on edge. Key moments kicked off with heated battles over evidence disclosure. On May 12th, prosecutors handed over incriminating letters West had written to Amy Pearce from jail, discovered just days earlier, sparking defense cries of unfair surprise and rushed forensics. The court allowed expert Stephen Drexler to testify on May 26th about restoring erased parts of those letters using lights, magnification, and chemicals, revealing damning admissions that tied West to the shooting. Pearce herself turned state's witness, admitting she blacked out sections to shield him, her words like nails in his coffin. Then came a nail-biter recess. On May 28th, as the jury deliberated guilt, they broke for a long weekend, only for a potentially biasing newspaper story to hit the Gadsden Times on May 30th, detailing the case. Defense demanded a juror poll on June 1st to check for taint, but the judge denied it, trusting prior instructions to avoid media. A risky call that left lingering questions about fairness in high-stakes justice. Other highlights included the medical examiner's chilling account of Berry's execution-style wound, underscoring the crime's brutality, and cross-examinations that exposed West's prior boasts about leaving no witnesses. Amid it all, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Could one overlooked detail unravel everything? In the end, the jury delivered their verdict on June 1st, 1999, finding West guilty of capital murder during a robbery, a unanimous decision that sealed his path to death row. But the drama didn't stop there. After a separate penalty phase hearing, they voted 10-2 to recommend death, weighing the horror of the act against West's youth and lack of major priors. The judge accepted it, sentencing him to death by electrocution, later changed under state law, on July 7, 1999, a moment that echoed the finality of his own gunshot years before. As the gavel fell, one couldn't help but reflect. In a system built on proof beyond doubt, does mercy ever sneak in, or is retribution the only echo left? Once the courtroom doors closed behind him in 1999, Jeffrey Todd West's world shrank to the stark confines of Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, a sprawling, weathered prison known as the Walls for its imposing barriers, where death row houses over 170 men in a grim routine of isolation and waiting. For 26 years, West's days blurred into a monotonous rhythm: solitary confinement in an 8-by-10-foot cell with meals slid through a slot, lights dimmed for just a few hours of sleep, and the constant hum of fluorescent bulbs and distant shouts reminding everyone of the fragility of time. Guards patrolled in pairs, enforcing rules with a mix of weary vigilance and occasional empathy. The air hung heavy with tension, a place where appeals became lifelines, and the weight of past sins pressed down like the humid Gulf air outside. West, once a young man of promise, now navigated this limbo quietly, his behavior marked by compliance rather than conflict. No major incidents, no fights that landed him in the hole. He spent his hours reading books from the limited library, often spiritual texts that echoed his childhood church days, and writing letters that poured out his regrets, forging unexpected bonds across prison walls. Remorse became a cornerstone of his transformation, a quiet reckoning that grew over decades. West spoke often of the decision he wishes each day that he could take back, his words carrying the ache of a man haunted by Margaret Berry's final moments. He found solace in religion, deepening the faith from his youth, attending Bible studies when allowed, and praying in his cell, not as a shield against judgment, but as a path to genuine change. Yet the system offered no easy grace. West and his lawyers filed appeal after appeal, challenging everything from trial evidence to the fairness of his youth at the time of the crime. Federal courts denied habeas petitions, the Alabama Supreme Court upheld his sentence, and by 2025, the U.S. Fifth Circuit had rejected his final arguments. Each rejection chipped away at the calendar, leaving him to reflect on the family he shattered. Berry's sons, now men, one of whom would later reach out with words of forgiveness that moved West to tears. In letters exchanged just weeks before the end, he poured out sorrow, admitting the robbery's desperation had stolen not just a life but futures. But remorse, however heartfelt, couldn't erase the execution-style shot or the clerk's blood on the floor. It only humanized the weight, forcing us to confront how years in a cage might forge a different man. yet never fully atoned for the boy who pulled the trigger. As dawn broke on September 25th, 2025, the final day arrived like a thief in the quiet of Holman, the execution window stretching from midnight into the next morning. West rose early in his death watch cell, closer to the chamber now, under constant guard, cameras watching, chaplains hovering with offers of prayer. He spent the morning in subdued reflection, flipping through a worn Bible and jotting notes for his spiritual advisor, the weight of the day settling like fog. No outbursts, just a steady gaze out the small barred window, perhaps tracing the pines that hid the world beyond. Family visited in the afternoon. His mother and brother, their faces etched with the exhaustion of 26 years' fight, sharing hushed words, hugs through plexiglass, and memories of the church choruses he'd once sung in. A lawyer slipped in too, one last briefing on stalled clemency pleas, but the governor's office held firm, citing the crime's brutality. Berry's son, Will, had written days earlier, pleading for mercy in a letter that reached West's hands. Forgiveness offered, not demanded, a fragile bridge over decades of grief that left West sobbing alone after the visits ended. For his last meal, West chose simply, a cheeseburger with fries and a chocolate shake from the prison kitchen. Items that evoked no extravagance, just a nod to ordinary comforts he'd lost long ago. As evening fell around 5:30 p.m., guards escorted him from the cell, his steps measured, hands cuffed, to the execution chamber. A sterile room of beige walls and one-way glass, where witnesses waited on the other side. Strapped to a gurney with a mask fitted over his face for nitrogen hypoxia, the method he'd selected years before as a perceived kinder end than the electric chair, West turned his eyes to the window. At 6:02 p.m., the flow began. Pure nitrogen gas replacing oxygen, silent and swift in theory, though critics whispered of the unknown pain. His last words, spoken softly to the room, carried raw finality. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused. Tell Will thank you, and may God forgive me." Within minutes, his chest heaved in shallow breaths, then stilled. He was pronounced dead at 6:09 p.m., the chamber emptying to the echo of held breaths on both sides of the glass. For Berry's family, closure mingled with quiet relief. For West's, an unfillable void. In that solemn hush, the cycle closed, leaving behind the stark truth of lives forever altered. In the shadow of such endings, one question lingers. Does a lifetime of remorse and forgiveness from a victim's kin ever outweigh the finality of an execution-style bullet? What do you think? Share in the comments below. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into the human side of justice.